Hello everybody, welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, bringing you a brand new video, and today I'm going to be talking about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, as we're now in the third episode of our Adapting Harry Potter for HBO series, and we reach what was my favourite film of the series. Not my favourite book though, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but as always, this is the series where I have gone back to the books, the first time I read them in probably around a decade, and I'm looking at how I would structure them for the HBO series that is obviously now filming and underway, and obviously we'll be doing each of these every Thursday through to the Deathly Hallows, which I think will be September time. So we're almost at the halfway point in the series now, and we are at the end of the shorter books, I guess we can call it, with this one. So this is going to be fun to talk about. I don't know how long this will be. They've been a lot longer, the first two episodes, than I thought they would be, and I'm dreading when we get to next week onwards with the really big books. So I'm going to talk about my concept of this. If you haven't seen any other ones, I do recommend you go back and have a look at them. It's been a lot of fun to do so far. It's been something quite different. It's not something we'll probably really do again on the channel, but what I'm looking at is how I would adapt every book into making it work. And I've set myself some guidelines, and if you're curious what I keep looking down, I've got my laptop with all my notes from reading the books that I've got to talk about, and I've set myself 4 rules. Number 1, this must be set in the 90s to be accurate. Obviously we know now through filming that's happening. I'm setting a rule of 8 episodes per season for all 7 seasons. I have to also come up with titles for every episode, and they can't obviously be the same titles every year. And I want to introduce a cold open for every single season. So that's a bit of criteria I have going into this. I have followed it for every single season. I've structured how I'm going to do these videos, and this is probably the last of the quote-unquote easier ones. So I guess let's just get into it now. Episode 1, Aunt Marge. Okay, so the cold open for episode 1 of season 3, I had 2 ideas, both of which involve Sirius Black. The first one was teasing and showing the escape of him from Azkaban, which sounds like the most obvious thing to do, but actually I don't want to do that as a cold open, because not that people know what happens, but it's a big thing to show the escape and to tease the escape, and I think it'd be a bit boring if you brought the Dementors in earlier than they need to be. So I went for something a bit different. I want this to be a flashback, going back to when James and Lily Potter died, and we're going to have the Sirius Black confrontation with Peter Pettigrew. And the way I want the cold open to work is having Sirius and Pettigrew come together, having the explosion happen, and it ending with a lot of people dead, the Finger and Sirius Black in this like insatiable laughter. And that's how I want to start it, and then we can do I think it'll be 12 or 13 years later at this point in time. So that's my cold open, and it will be addressed in a later episode. And where obviously I'm going to kickstart this episode, and this is an extended episode I have to add as well. I have put a timer in at this one being around about 1 hour 15, 1 hour 30, as I do want to get to almost Hogwarts by the end of this one. Because I'll get into that a little bit more. I know in the season 2 it took me 2 episodes to get there, and this episode 2 will be way into it by then. But we're going to have Aunt Marge coming over on Harry's birthday, not to see Harry on her birthday. She's been over for a week, and I want to montage everything that's happened in the space in which she's here. Her dogs, she's a bulldog breeder, having her dogs sort of chasing him up a tree, him being scared of them, her being just truly terrible to him, the family, the Dursleys being as bad as they've always been, Dudley being more spoiled that his aunt is here. And I want to have a bit of fun of that over a week to really build up how awful this has been for Harry, to build up how miserable he is. And where that obviously does come to a blow is at the meal in which he does essentially blow her up, which we know and we're familiar with. But we can't just have it happen in the opening scene. It worked so well for film, but it isn't something that can work in the opening 5 minutes of a TV season. We can really spend about 10-15 minutes with her over and building him up to this level. And then where we're going to go, this is also bringing the night bus early. We're going to have him packing up, him leaving, Uncle Vernon chastising him, not signing the paperwork for him to go to Hogsmeade, which is a really big part of the season, and having him being bailed out by the night bus. The fact there is a dog, which will play a big part later on in the season, we're going to have that there too. And obviously the night bus sequence, we get a first look at Kingsley Shacklebolt. Now whether they want to bring him in now and cast him in this, or they want to wait till Order of the Phoenix, I've got no problem with either. He doesn't have as much to do in the Goblet of Fire, so I really don't see the need, but there are other characters I will talk about bringing earlier in this season. Obviously, we're going to have the humongous moment when we get to the Leaky Cauldron. We have to have Harry meeting Fudge for the first time. Now, We have the knowledge as readers that Fudge becomes an antagonist of the series in the Order of the Phoenix. We get a real big moment at the end of Goblet of Fire with Fudge and Dumbledore starting that divide. So we need to keep building him up. We've seen him in season 2, as I mentioned, in Hagrid's hut, but he doesn't know Harry's there. This has to be Harry meeting him officially and seeing how different Fudge is with Harry compared to how he was at Hagrid's. The fact there's a bit of fear that Sirius Black's escaped and he's not addressed it yet. So we need to start building up into this murderer that's gone missing, and having Fudge being a centrepiece to this, to the Hogsmeade discussion later on, is essential. So having them meeting and Harry sort of sussing him out immediately, I think will go a long way. And we've got to build up that somewhat relationship to later divide, and obviously hope, I know we've got an actor cast, that we get some great chemistry with him and the new Harry Potter actor. So it's going to be quite straightforward from this point with the Diagon Alley stuff. You can bring in the Weasleys, you can have the usual book shopping, all that sort of stuff. There's not too much time needs to be spent here in year 3 because the core of what happens is going to be at the platform on the train. We want to have the conversation when Mr. and Mrs. Weasley take Harry aside, and they essentially talk about basically him not doing anything dangerous this year. The Sirius Black conversation, again, Harry thinking everyone thinks he's an idiot, but he now knows there's somewhat of a connection to Sirius Black and to Harry, and it's got to be a mystery as to how Harry finds out about what happened to his parents. They need to build up the fact that just this Craig's supporter, it might be after him, and they don't know that themselves. So there's a lot to do in this opening episode, and not too much time needs to be spent on other things. And another essential part of this is having Scabbers, is having the Weasley family going on their holiday, the fact they've come back from it. We need to have Ron talking to Harry about everything, speaking about what they got up to. The Daily Prophet article is going to be very important in this one, because that's part of how Sirius escaped. And where I want to have this episode end and go on is the Hogwarts Express ride to Hogwarts, where very plain and simple, quite easy. We're going to have this episode end with the cliffhanger of the Dementor going for Harry. We can have Lupin in the carriage, but we haven't met him quite yet. But where I want to leave it is Harry fainting and hearing his mother scream in the first episode. Episode 2, Buckbeak. So you might think I've jumped forward with episode 2 being called Buckbeak, but we will get there. It's got to start where obviously episode 1 finished, the Dementor cliffhanger. We're going to have Harry waking up. It would work for the episodic gap. Him just talking and meeting Lupin for the first time. We need to have a really important Lupin casting and personality in this moment, that he knows that James and Lily's son, and he isn't going to tell them his relationship to them at this point in time, but he was obviously seeing the essential sibling he kind of had before with James, and we need to sort of tease and build that relationship over the season. Their first meeting is so important in that, and where I want to go with this is then obviously having the sorting ceremony, where for the second in a row we're going to have Harry miss it, and that's because he's speaking to McGonagall about what happened on the train. We also need to start teasing Hermione with the Time Turner, so we're going to have both Harry and Hermione missing it to be with McGonagall. Nothing wrong, no major characters come in the third season to sort of cross-reference. We need to see the sorting in one screen zigzagging between these, but we can tease the slightest that Hermione's going to have some special stuff with McGonagall, because the beauty of that third film isn't just the direction, but they really do put it in an easy way for Hermione to later have the revelation she has a Time Turner. So I'm excited to see how early they can start that off with her taking all these extra classes and all these lessons, speaking to McGonagall. We can then have them going into the feast. They get to see Dumbledore's speech, and we're going to have the introduction to the new teachers. We're going to have Defense Against the Dark Arts. Obviously, we're going to have Lupin coming on board, the person they met from the train. That's obviously a big moment. Defense Against the Dark Arts curse needs to continue. And on top of this, we need to also have Hagrid announced for the care of magical creatures, because he's took over the retiring role, and we know how important that's going to be for the third season. So a quite simple and easy feast. A little bit of fun to have. The story hasn't really kick-started as yet, and then we can go into the new school year. We can have them doing their divination lessons. We can introduce Trelawney properly. I'd like to see her in the early seasons. I know they don't start it until year 3, but I think in the second episode we can really quickly establish the new school year, the new calendar, and we do need to start moving the series forward at a quicker speed than perhaps the first 2 seasons, as the books are about to get insanely longer. And where I want this episode to end and the discussion to be on episode 2 is to actually have Hagrid's first lesson, which is Care of Magical Creatures, Harry riding Buckbeak, and most importantly, Buckbeak obviously attacking Malfoy at the end. That plays a huge part amongst the season. Buckbeak's the pivotal character of this season too, so I think it'd be great to see that. And again, it's the right way to end the second episode because of a repeat of where we'll get into episode 3 very briefly. Episode 3, The Boggarts. So you can tell by the title what this episode is going to entail, episode 3. But before we get to Defense Against the Dark Arts, we need to have a bit of a time gap. We need to have had the night go by in which Harry has obviously, Malfoy's had all these issues with Buckbeak, him lapping up the injury. We need to have the potions lesson where he's really milking it to get sympathy for himself. We need to bring Snape back being as sort of evil as he's already been. Now, we're going to get a different Snape in season 3 because obviously we brought in one of what will be known as his bullies from his school days. He's going to have a different attitude in season 3. He is a sort of joke antagonist to the children's perspective for the early seasons until things do get quite real from Goblet of Fire onwards. But we need to start bringing now his relationships with other wizards, especially ones his age, which is a big way in developing the season. So of the first Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, we'll have the Boggart. We're going to get to see a competent Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. This is the best teacher Harry had at school, theoretically. You could argue Barty Crouch Jr. is in Goblet of Fire, but we will be able to see the competency of it. We need to start teasing the werewolf stuff. With the full moon, with the Boggart, the balloon, we can play up all of that. Again, this is the trickiest season for me to them to do because the third film, it's not just my favourite, it is regarded as the best film by many. And it nailed almost everything from the book, especially for the film side of things. The things it cut is a shame. It made sense to cut what they cut, and it is primarily Quidditch. And I'm going to also have to talk about Quidditch in this episode because Quidditch is a huge part of Year 3. Spoiler, they win the Quidditch Cup. I'll get to that in later episodes, but we need to really build up Oliver Wood, it being his final year at school. And that's what I want to do in this episode as well. We need to have Quidditch practice. We need to have them saying how important it is to win. This is his last chance to win. It's a generational Quidditch team, as they would call it, and they have the ability to do so. And that is a big part of this episode, is having the Quidditch practice. We need to then bring in Hogsmeade. The fact Harry misses Hogsmeade because he doesn't have the signing stuff. And due to him missing Hogsmeade, we're going to use that to start building up his relationship with Lupin. Going for tea with him, seeing the Grinslow in the corner of the room is an important one. And then developing a bit of a relationship, because that's going to be important for future seasons. Harry does become the godfather of Lupin's son. And we need to build up their relationship almost gelling immediately. Again, the films did it perfectly with David Thewlis and Daniel Radcliffe. And I'd like to see the show develop this a little bit more. And they're going to have the patience and the time to do so. So Harry spending his time with Lupin instead. We can have him making comments about training, potentially, or his fear of the Dementor, the fact it wasn't Voldemort in the Boggart. We can bring those sorts of things up, but we've just got to tease this. Let's have these two together. We then also need to get this back on track for where the story's going. So we can talk about the missing portrait, that something's gone wrong. We can talk about the fact that Lupin then is going to go missing himself. Snape is going to do the Defense Against the Dark Arts second lesson. And we can start to have Snape nastily talking about werewolves, making comments about werewolves, setting them the homework, because that's going to have a big part of this. And I think it's great to bring in the Snape-Lupin divide quicker and easier. And rather than just being this big twist at the end, it can be this Snape has sort of built this up across the season. And where I want to end episode 3, which might be sudden for some people, is having the first Quidditch match, which is also going to be the first Quidditch match Harry loses because he is attacked by the Dementors. We can do another cliffhanger episode. Yes, that's 2 in the first 3 of Harry being attacked by a Dementor, but it's a huge part of the season. But the most important thing I'm actually going to say about this Quidditch match isn't the Dementors, isn't the result. We've got to bring in Cedric Diggory early. Now, I personally don't mind him had an extra cast as him in the earlier seasons. We know Cedric's obviously a huge part of the Goblet of Fire, but this is where him and Harry are going to have conversations and begin somewhat a relationship. So I'd like Cedric Diggory's actor cast in Prisoner of Azkaban that can then play the role in Goblet of Fire onwards. And I think that's the great thing about this being TV, is that you can bring in characters later on, whether it be recasting or having them as a presence or casting them early. I don't mind how they do it, but definitely in Azkaban we must have a Cedric Diggory actor by that point. And that's a great way to end the episode with the first the first Quidditch match loss. Episode 4, Hogsmeade. So I want to pick up episode 4 with Harry in hospital after the Quidditch match. We need to have the Nimbus 2001 being destroyed. The fact the team lost. We need to bring the fact Cedric Diggory offered to replay the game to build him up as this charming, lovable character who can do no wrong, who will end up being one of the first innocent victims of and the school children across the 7 books. So we can play at the hospital angle. We then want to have Harry again spending time with Lupin while the others are at Hogsmeade. We can talk about the Dementors, the fact that he's going to maybe offer Harry some training to come down the line, or Harry wanting to have a conversation about combating them. But we also need to start building Harry up to learning about why is he so tied to Sirius Black? What is going on? What part of mystery? Why is everyone concerned about Harry whilst it's just one escaped convict? So with that in mind, we bring the Marauders map nice and early, episode 4. We can have Fred and George passing it on to Harry. We don't need to have them playing with it in the first 2 seasons. It can be their hidden secret, and we can have that great moment of when Harry gets to go to Hogsmeade for the first time. Whether Hogsmeade will look the same, whether it will have a new design, I do not know. But it will be a big part of this, and for future seasons, I guess you can say, having Hogsmeade becoming this visceral character. You can bring in more of the shops, the restaurants. I know they've just announced the giant Lego set for it. But it's essential that in Harry's first Hogsmeade outing, we do get him going to the 3 broomsticks, and we do get him hearing the story about Sirius Black being Harry's godfather, about killing Peter Pettigrew, and this is going to now go back to the cold open. We're going to have Fudge's perspective of what happens, and we're going to play a flashback, or not a flashback, but we're going to play a version of events on screen that ends up obviously being incorrect, but is going to build Sirius Black up as this monster that wants to kill Harry to continue what he was meant to do. Obviously, we know we've got McGonagall in that scene. We've got Madame Rosmerta. We've got Fudge. It's a big scene for the world building. It's a lot to take on board 4 episodes in, but it is essential for this, and that is going to set Harry off on his quest to want to kill Sirius Black. And then I'm going to follow this up with a sequence of Hagrid's, where he's going to learn that the Malfoys are going after Buckbeak, how bad the lesson went, there is potential for it to go to a trial. We need to start playing that angle up in the background, but where I want to end the episode is on Christmas Day. So 4 episodes in, we're at Christmas, and I want Harry to have the present of the firebolt. It being a Christmas where there are very few people at the school, I think this is the year in which it's like Harry, Dumbledore, Trelawney, and like a couple of other students. But if Harry gets the firebolt for Christmas as a present, we can then have the sequences of Hermione essentially grassing him in and it being taken away by McGonagall, causing a divide between them, which I think would be a good way to end this episode. Episode 5, The Firebolt. So I want to kickstart episode 5 with training of the Patronus, Harry taking his first lesson with Lupin. We know he didn't do it too many times before we get to the end, but if we've been steadily building their relationship up across the first few episodes of the season, then it's going to go a long way in ensuring that is there, that Harry is ready to do this, to learn this. And I think it'd be great to have the first lesson of which he obviously fails, which is, you can't conjure this. We're going to get parallels down the line with Harry teaching this to other students, so it's essential that we get some mirror across the multiple years. And we're going to start to see Lupin's teaching on Harry, and how Harry will then be a teacher himself of how people like Lupin have treated and spoke to him. Then where I want to go with this one is having a Quidditch montage, not any matches, but I want to have the training going terrible for the Quidditch. The fact that they're inspecting the Firebot broomstick, the fact he hasn't been given it, he hasn't got his numbers 2000, it's not going well as an understatement. I guess you could say the training. I wanted a montage out of the Patronus training, that things are also going bad quite there. And this is going to be a dour episode, because we're then going to have Scabbers going missing and blood being found and Ron turning on Hermione and Crookshanks. So this is the episode where things are going to go wrong. And then what we need to build up to is to put it on the rise. We get 1 hour for this. There's a lot of time to do this. We can then have the approval of the Firebolt. We can then have the first training session with the Firebolt, with the Quidditch team, seeing how quick this broomstick is, that this is a game changer, that they will easily win anything. We're going to have the reaction of other people seeing the broomstick. We can then start to also synchronise it with the Patronus, that maybe his lessons are going better. And this is a great way to move us into spring from winter in this one. But where I want to sort of have a main event of this is the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. We can have Cho Chang introduced, the same way we're introducing Cedric Diggory. We can have Cho Chang come on board, but this is going to be a straight-up massacre where we get to see the Firebolt essentially win Harry it very quickly, very easily. Have the Quidditch party in the common room, everyone's buzzing. It's very high indeed. And then we can end it with Ron waking up in the middle of the night with Sirius Black with the knife. which is a great cliffhanger. We're getting back into the main route of where we want the season to go. Episode 6, The Trial. So episode 6 is going to be an interesting one. I want to have the aftermath of Ron having Sirius back in the common room. We need to have the details that this gives Ron a bit of a high, that he's popular, that he was the student that saw Sirius Black with a knife coming for him. This is obviously going to play a big part of where we get to in the following episode, episode 7. We need to have Hagrid giving the speech to them about Buckbeak and that he needs their support and help in towards building towards a trial. We can have the fact that they've been alienating Hagrid somewhat and they've not helped him when they said they would. We can have Hermione going off to Hagrid and having Hagrid being annoyed at Ron and Harry for not helping her. So we can start to build up their trio a little bit more. And what I want to do with this one is also having Harry sneak into Hogsmeade again, which is a big part of this third season. And where I sit with this is we need to have the moment of Snape catching them coming back. We need to have the fact that Malfoy clocks that Harry was there in Hogsmeade. We need to have him going back to Snape. We need to have Snape on the guard at the tunnel exits. And essentially Snape catching Harry with the map at the tunnel, giving him the berating of what's going on there, knowing there is more to it than that, Snape receiving the map, Lupin coming in, also seeing the map, taking the map, because that's got a big part. And we can have the two feuding with one another. We can bring up their, again, childhood issues. We can have Lupin being outright furious at Harry, and then we can lay out the fact that Harry has seen Peter Pettigrew on the map. That's going to have an important part of what comes next. That Lupin's going to take this on by himself. He isn't going to tell them, obviously, he knows the map, he knows he helped create it, but we can start to build up that is Lupin as trustworthy as we think. And where I want this episode to end is them going to Hagrid and finding out that Buckbeak's been sentenced to death, which is going to move into the events of what is to follow in the next 2 episodes. Episode 7, The Shrieking Shack. So this episode's going to probably be my favourite of the season, if I'm going to be completely honest. We need to have more montages. It's exam season, Quidditch training. We're moving towards the end of the year. And year 3 is a relatively issue-free year, if I'm being completely honest, until we get to the ending. There hasn't been as many terrible things as the first 2 seasons or what's to come. So year 3 is the kind of calm before the storm. And we can show this with them having more of the school montage stuff. And then I want it to come to a sudden sort of leg breaker where we're going to get the divination lesson, well, the moment where Harry is given the prophecy by Trelawney. One of the 2 correct prophecies she's ever done, which we need to reiterate. And it's going to be about, reuniting with the Dark Lord once more, the servant going off to find them, it will happen tonight, etc., etc. That's a huge moment. And then we're going to have the characters going off into, I guess what we can say we all know, the Hagrid's hut moment, Buckbeak's execution. We're going to bring in McNair, who is obviously going to be a big Death Eater for the years to come, that Hagrid obviously kills in the Deathly Hallows. I'd like to try and play this up a little bit more, that he's mates with Malfoy. It explains why they're both in Fudge's pocket, why they've got Buckbeak sentenced to death. We can have the moment of them going off into the Whomping Willow. Really play at the fact that this is a tunnel into the Shrieking Shack, that we'll come back to this in future years. But the Shrieking Shack itself, this is going to be the most difficult scene, I think, of the entire 7 seasons, because it's probably my favourite scene of the films. We have just a group of thespian actors just going at each other with some of the best performances by absolute screen legends, theatre legends, some of the best actors Britain has ever produced, alongside like a young generation of great actors who sat there with them. So to have this done again is going to be very difficult to do. What I would like to see is this then having the flashback to not only the cold open where we have the story that Pettigrew was alive, that he's the rat. We can have the real cold open done there. But I actually want to put flashbacks to the Marauders. I'm in a crowd that does not care for the Marauders to be its own series. It's a weird fan fiction thing. I've never really cared. There's not a lot you can do. They're just school kids that used to bully people. One of them's a werewolf, cool. They sneak off every month, but there's not enough drama for that to be a series. But you can have some cool moments of flashbacks here. We also want to obviously have them with the younger Snape, them creating the map, all that sort of stuff. We can play this in this sequence, which would help to differentiate it from the film version. And where I want to continue this episode is having Lupin turning into the werewolf when they're going to get Sirius back his justice, that Harry sort of patched up with him. We're going to have the moment Pettigrew escapes, the servant reuniting with the master. We can then have the Dementor sequence with Harry. And where I kind of want this episode to end and to sit in isn't a cliffhanger again with the Dementors. I want to actually have Harry in the hospital wing. We can start to play up Fudge refusing to listen to them about Sirius Black being innocent. We can tease him being a bad leader again, because that's going to have a huge part in a year. He's refusing to listen to the word of three children. And where are we going to go? This is bringing in Dumbledore, who's very limited in this third season, by the way, where we can have the cliffhanger or the segue into the finale being Hermione activating the Time Turner. Episode 8, The Prisoner of Azkaban. So this final episode is going to be quite plain and straightforward, I think. I think a lot of people know what's going to happen with this one. We're obviously going to revisit the events of episode 7 in a new timeline. The Time Turner obviously working as it's meant to do. So we'll have opening of Hermione explaining why she took all these lessons, why she's been grouchy, that she's going back to do more lessons. We can bring up the fact it's been approved by the Ministry of Magic, that McGonagall requested it due to her ability in school. And that explains how she has been across the season. We can have them going back to Hagrid's hut to save Buckbeak's life. Where Dumbledore mentions more than one innocent life can be saved. We can then have them waiting at the Shrieking Shack, which not a lot happens, if I'm honest. I know the film added the werewolf chasing them somewhat, and it made sense for a film, but this is a very boring sequence. They just literally spend ages waiting for them all to come out. And where they essentially go with this is running to the lake for the Dementor sequence, which we then find out was Harry conjuring the Patronus. It was not his dad's. And this is a really big character moment for him, where we get to see how powerful he truly is and what he has learned. We can have them rescuing Sirius from Flitwick's classroom. And where I kind of want to do this episode is, whilst Pettigrew's gone away, and it's a bit of a dour ending, I've swapped a couple of things around that I actually, it's very generic for me to talk about the time travel stuff. It's not actually that big a part of this episode. I actually want to end this episode with the finale for the Quidditch, which I think takes place actually before these events, but I want this to end on a real high, that this is the last of the innocent seasons, where it isn't going to be murders and people dying every other ending. So I think it'd be really cool to see the finale of Quidditch Year 3 be the final of this season, the moment in which they win the House Cup, that Oliver Wood gets to be a champion, that this is, quote, Gryffindor's greatest ever team. We can really play up that triumphant happy ending. We can have Sirius watching from afar, which I think from memory happened in this one. So there's a lot of fun we can have with it. And we need to also then tease the Quidditch World Cup to set up the 4th season of how that starts. Because, let's face it, guys, if the school year ended in June and the World Cup was on in July, no one's not spoken about it. So we need to have them having conversation about seeing each other at the Quidditch World Cup, or Oliver Wood bringing it up, or to some extent we need to know that is coming, and that's coming soon. Okay, so my battery went out at the end of episode 8, which is great. I didn't rush it for the sake of that, but the timing thankfully worked out really well. So yeah, that's my Prisoner of Azkaban, how I would do season 3. It's a lot shorter than the other episodes, which I knew. I don't think there's as much to create and introduce, and it is definitely one of them the trickier seasons for them to do, because it's a shorter book, it's a more linear storytelling, and it's a lot more simple in the grand scheme of things. I spoke a lot about the Horcruxes in episode 2. None of that this time round. We just obviously have to tease the fact that Peter Pettigrew is a villain, and that he does go off to find his master, but that's got a lot more bearing on season 4. So that'll be me talking Goblet of Fire next Thursday. I hope you've enjoyed this video. As always, please do comment your thoughts. I'll reply to anyone that does comment them, and I look forward to seeing what you guys think of this. And so thanks all so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.